Welcome back, guys, for the second week of the Big Sky Podcast Network Power Rankings, presented by Tubbs at the Club, sponsored by Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. I'm your host, Brian Marceau, and look, you guys know the drill by now. The way the Power Rankings work is Big Sky Podcast Network contributors, beat writers covering Big Sky schools, and then just people we know who follow the conference as a whole. We all vote on teams 1 through 12. The average of those votes becomes the teams. We don't actually fret on the show about what the rankings are for individual teams. We just talk about the weeks that the teams had and what the teams look like this far into the season. And that's how it works. Got to do this preface. I'm going to say this preface virtually every single week. The posted time for this show is it is heavily a suggestion about what time it's going to take place. We're going live about an hour after the theoretical scheduled posting for the show. We had people jump in the comment section early. Well, hey, thanks everyone for trying. I'm doing my best. This show, again, this is going to be a nature. It's always going to be a late night Sunday, the end. But with that, we had a bit of a Big Sky scheduling was a little bit weird this week, OOC wise, or it was not weird because we know year in and year out, it can be hard to gauge what teams are based off their out of conference schedules because you got the ocean that separates the scheduling abilities of teams like Montana and Montana State. And then some of the schools like Portland State, where with Montana State, they're essentially buying wins for the most part, with an exception, Montana State this week. They did step out of their comfort zone scheduling wise. And then Portland States are funding the athletic department. So what the hell do we take out of these games? Well, we take what we can, the end. And with that, we're going to start at the bottom. And the bottom of the conference is virtually unanimously exactly what it was last week, Northern Colorado. So look, Northern Colorado 0-1. This week, Northern Colorado hosts Incarnate Word. Now, Incarnate Word they're a good FCS team, and Northern Colorado objectively is not. But the Bears go down 42-7, and in 2 weeks of football, Northern Colorado has scored 18 points. So we're not going to spend that much tonight talking about Northern Colorado. I don't think I need to explain to anyone. I don't care what the team matchups are. If in 8 quarters of football, your team has put up 18 points, you're not beating anyone. So this is back-to-back ass kickings for Northern Colorado, which is more or less what you should expect. It's more that, look, I was on the train at the start of the season, not expecting like playoffs out of Northern Colorado by any means, but I know Ed Lamb's a good coach. And I guess what I thought is Northern Colorado would have enough holdover talent from the Ed McCaffrey days to then capitalize on having a guy who knows what he's doing, calling the shots with that talent. And I think it's just going to take a while for Northern Colorado to climb into something respectable. That's not a slight to head coach Ed Lamb. I've said this a ton of times on Tubbs of the Club back in the days when Paul Petrino was fired at Idaho, and Jason Eck, we didn't know Jason Eck was going to be the coach at the time. So early in that process, I thought a guy like Ed Lamb would have been a good hire at Idaho. I think he's a great hire at Northern Colorado, but Northern Colorado is just not ready yet. I mean, look, just going through team stats overall, Northern Colorado gave up 617 yards to Incarnate Word. Incarnate Word's a great offensive team, but good Lord, 617 yards is a lot to give up. And also, hey, I brought up Northern Colorado, 18 points in 8 quarters. Well, they gained 261 total yards. Basic takeaways are, and I don't mean this to be flippant, offensively, Northern Colorado more or less sucks at everything, and I think part of it's because they just don't have a strong enough offensive line to buy quarterback Jacob Sermon time or to develop any sort of holes for the running backs to get through. Leading rusher was David Afari, 14 carries for 43 yards. Sermon was 13-27 for 114 yards and 1 pick. Not impressive whatsoever, man. We're going to move on from talking about Northern Colorado, but again, hold that stat, 18 points in 8 quarters. I don't think there's much else I have to talk about. Coming in at number 11. Now, this is a bit of a drop from last week. Cal Poly. Look, going back to what I said about gauging what the hell out of conference games mean for Big Sky teams is it's a bit of a crapshoot at times. And I was relatively high on Cal Poly after the first week of, handling San Diego in a game that honestly was not close to the 2.5 point score outcome. Cal Poly handled San Diego pretty easily. Well, Cal Poly travels to San Jose State, and it was the same Cal Poly that we've been accustomed to the last handful of years, going down 59-3, losing fumbles on their first two possessions. The Mustangs dug themselves a hole, which they had absolutely no prayer of digging themselves out at any point. The story that is going to continue to be interesting for Cal Poly is how Sam Heward looks. I thought talent-wise in week one, he looked like he was the most talented quarterback in the Big Sky arm strength-wise, but that there's going to be some learning curves for an underclassman who has not played very much D1 football. Well, Sam Heward did his best to make me regret saying some positive things. Goes 11-17 for 66 yards and one pick. Jaden Jones, who was a promising freshman last season before blowing his knee, came in for relief, went 2 of 7 for 8 yards. But look, it's 59-3. Obviously, nothing went well at all for Cal Poly. Look, the basic team stat breakdown. Cal Poly gains a total of 169 yards. And look, there's your first issue. Cal Poly, when they're going to surprise teams, if they're going to surprise teams in the Big Sky, they're going to have higher scoring games. They just don't have the defense to play low scoring affairs whatsoever. Well, if Cal Poly is gaining 169 yards, obviously the only option is a blowout. They gave up 472 to San Jose State. And look, San Jose State is a solid Mountain West team. A solid Mountain West team playing a not very good Big Sky team should be a blowout. But this game could have been worse. San Jose State had their 59 points at the end of the third quarter. This was as ugly as it gets. So other names to pay attention to for Cal Poly: rushing Mark Biggins rushed 9 times for 48 yards. Leading rusher in terms of attempts was Aiden Ramos, 13 rushes for 28 yards. Two top receivers were Evan Burkhart, 3 catches for 27 yards, and then Paul Holyfield Jr., 3 catches for 17 yards. But obviously, the overall stats are going to be paltry if the team gained 167 yards on the game. We're going to move on. Cal Poly, there's moments where they look promising. Also, look, at the beginning of the game, I was watching. Defensively, Cal Poly up front at first looked like they might be relatively solid, but they just couldn't defend at all through the air. Well, whatever. I think Cal Poly just doesn't have the depth up front at all to have anyone take a rest, because Cal Poly was not effective against the rush against San Jose State, giving up 267 yards on 43 attempts and 5 rushing touchdowns. So, like I said, anything good I said about Cal Poly, I take it back. Hit the comments section real quick. Captain 58 talking about UNC. McCaffrey left Lamb a pile of doo-doo. Yes. And Dane Moon asking, is Idaho State next? Yeah, Dane, how did you know Idaho State was coming next? Look, the bottom of the conference had a very rough week, which is the nature of being the bottom of the Big Sky, playing in some of these games that fund your athletic department. Some of the games are it's just ugly. And coming in at number 10, Idaho State. Now, the Bengals looked solid at the end of week one, really pushed San Diego State. Idaho State plays a second consecutive Mountain West road game, this time against Utah State. And this was just another ugly one. I mean, look, the final score is 78-28, and that's not even the biggest or the most horrifying stat line for Idaho State. The Bengals surrendered 44 second quarter points. Now, I'm just going to run through the scores for Utah State, because again, it's just horrifying to look at the box score. Like, you see 44 points and you think it's a glitch. It's not. Here, second quarter, Bengals give up an 8-yard rushing touchdown, a 40-yard rushing touchdown, a 4-yard touchdown pass, a 47-yard pick six, a 20-yard touchdown pass, a 60-yard touchdown run. The Bengals did score a touchdown in this point and then gave up a field goal as well. That's all in one quarter. So, yeah, obviously this game was out of reach. This game got ugly very fast for Idaho State. After finishing the first quarter in the 7-7 draw, the wheels just completely fell off. Jordan Cook, again, took the most snaps under center for Idaho State at quarterback, going 20 of 30 for 185 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Hunter Hayes also saw a good amount of action, went 11 for 17, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think it is safe to say that the quarterback decision probably still is a little bit up in the air. Jordan Cook has gotten more snaps in both games, but Hunter Hayes is pretty, I mean, again, relative to losing 78-28, Hunter Hayes did produce relatively well in this game, was also solid. I mean, Hunter Hayes' stat line against San Diego State was better than Jordan Cook's. I mean, the split on these two is Jordan Cook looks like he's the more physically talented player, but Hunter Hayes is more battle tested, and you could see at least a little bit of that. Or maybe I should give Jordan Cook credit for throwing that pick was a touchdown. Maybe I should read those 2 touchdowns. On the ground, Idaho State did rush a little bit more than last week's 5 non-quarterback rushes, but the passing to rushing split was 53-30 this game, although it's probably more accurate to read that as 53-25 because 5 of those 30 rushes came from quarterbacks. On the ground, Idaho State did break 100 yards, which based off last week's 5 total rushes, you might think that would never happen, but it did. 30 rushes for 101 yards and 1 rushing touchdown. That 1 rushing touchdown went to Raiden Hunter, the guy you would expect is going to be the number 1 running back on this team. But Hunter, 10 rushes for 19 yards. Overall, team stats to look at real quick before we hit the comment section. Look, this is just the 3rd consecutive game where the Big Sky team gave up nearly or over 600 yards. Utah State Aggies gain 591 yards, but at least to Idaho State's credit, minus the 50-point score gap, the Bengals did gain 424 yards. So, hey, maybe a takeaway here is that, of course, Cody Hawkins has some stuff he's going to be ironing out. Look, this is a young coaching staff with a second consecutive year overhauled roster. It's going to take some time, and no one thinks Idaho State's a playoff team. So I'm not going to talk about Idaho State as though that's the background. But look, you can still see, you can look through this game, look through the stat line. I'll say I watched them too. And you can see, like, look, if Idaho State is going to be good, it's in that, or if they're going to be good some weeks, not good relative to Big Sky itself, but if they're going to be good some weeks, if they're going to pick up some wins, if they're going to push some teams to the Big Sky, it's going to be from scoring the ball. And Idaho State, look, even in this blowout, they put up almost 450 yards total in a blowout. And hey, I see that as promising that, hey, maybe Cody Hawkins is going to take some time to figure stuff out defensively. And even if he did, I don't think Idaho State has the talent to truly figure it out defensively yet. But like you can see the vision that Cody Hawkins has right now of what Idaho State's going to be. And I'm just going to compare Idaho State to Cal Poly for a second. Cal Poly is in year 3-4 of their overhaul from the triple option days to a spread offense. Well, Idaho State's in year 1 of their overhaul, and you can see where the team's developing an identity. So that's what we have for Idaho State. Hit the comment section real quick. We've got our man. Oh man, hey, my Idaho State dudes, thank you for tuning in for this. I got a little bit of shit on Twitter from a couple accounts, which I don't really care about. Complaining about the Tubbs of the Club main show not taking Idaho State seriously. And I'm just going to say, hey, Tubbs of the Club, that's an Idaho show. We don't have to take other teams seriously. And oftentimes we won't. But the power rankings whole point is to just know the conference well. So Idaho State dudes who tuned in, thank you. Hitting the comment section, really heavy comment section presence from Idaho State. So thank you guys. We have McLean Westbrook, our man from Jungle Land, saying this is going to sound like insane cope from an ISU fan, but that game wasn't quite as bad as the final score was. Well, no, hey, McLean, look, that's why I emphasize the second quarter. And of course, so once Utah State had that padding, we all understand that when a team's up by 700, that there's only so much we can interpret from then on. But you're right, minus that catastrophic quarter, it was a 2-ish score game against Utah State. you're right. That is an, I quote, insane cope. But look, if you're talking glass half full, and that's what you need to do for Idaho State right now, it's a first year coach. The dude needs some time. I think that's the right way to look at it from an Idaho State perspective. And McLean Westbrook again, Aggie scored 21 points in 70 seconds in the second quarter. My God, McLean, I got to ask you what that was like living through. Dane Moon, second quarter was really rough. Yes. McLean Westbrook, outside of that horrendous series, there were some positives for the team. Hey, McLean, throw them down and I'll read them. Last couple comments. We have McLean Westbrook again. Cook played better than last week. Hayes looked good. And that's the other thing, if you're an Idaho State fan, to take away is the guys who played last year who are holding overs this year, like Hunter Hayes. Hey, does it look like there's progress on the team? Because that is what your gauge is relative to where you're starting. As far as 50-point losses go, not the worst is what McLean's saying. So hey, we've given Idaho State some time. I think that the jury's in right now in Idaho State. No one is going to accuse them of being top half of the conference, no question. But I think if you're an Idaho State fan, there's things to look at as promising, particularly that at least Cody Hawkins is attempting to be inventive with what he does offensively. And you can look at guys like Hunter Hayes compared to last season, see what the progress is. If you are a non-Idaho State fan, your interpretation is, of course, well, Idaho State's a team that virtually everyone who is not Cal Poly or maybe even Northern Colorado is probably going to be favored against. And Dane Moon, then UC Davis or Portland State after this one. Well, you're not that far off. But hey, before we get to the next one, got to hit show sponsor Snake River Stampede Canadian Whiskey. Look, it's Snake River Stampede is easily the best Canadian whiskey you're going to buy in the state of Idaho. You can get just regular Snake River Stampede. It's $24.95 a fifth, I believe $42.95 for a handle, which is the only size I buy. You can get their small batch 1915 edition. That's $38.95 for a fifth. The difference between the two different whiskeys, they both kick ass. They both have double barrel finishes. The Snake River Stampede, just their standard is finished in first fill bourbon barrels, which are then finished in Oloroso sherry casks. Your small batch 1915 edition, it's aged an extra 2 years overall compared to Snake River, the standard, but its double barrel finishing goes from first fill bourbon barrels to ex-Canadian whiskey barrels. Both versions are great buys for sure. Both in terms of Canadian whiskeys you're going to get in Idaho are top of the line. If you have not given Snake River a shot for tailgating, absolutely you got to do so. So coming in at we're at number 9, our favorite guys, top 5 Portland State. And I say our favorite because I got to come clean. In our Tubs of the Club preseason episode and in my personal polls I've submitted, I've probably failed you guys by allowing how jaded I am with Portland State. Sink their polling position maybe a little more than it should. But look, this week, Portland State again, and I hit this last week, but you're just one of the reasons I'm fatigued with Portland State is you're never going to learn anything about this team in their out of conference scheduling. They always schedule typically two FBS, if not 2 Power 5 games. They get their asses handed to them both those weeks. Then they play an at best Division II team for their 3rd week game. And then we walk into the conference season and there's nothing to interpret about Portland State. Also, Big Sky Media for a long time kept believing in the quote unquote vaunted recruiting classes Portland State would have. But I can probably stop bitching about Portland State personally and just talk about the game. Portland State travels to Laramie, Wyoming, where the Vikings, they held tough against the Cowboys. Portland State goes down 31-17. The game was, I don't think it was close relative to 31-17. Wyoming had all 31 of their points at the end of the 3rd quarter and milked the clock to close this one out. Portland State did pick up a touchdown at the end, but there was not really a moment where Wyoming was threatened. They led 14-0 at the end of the 1st quarter, and that's all she wrote. So as far as production for Portland State, the Vikings did keep total yards relatively close. It's 371 allowed to Wyoming to 344 gained for Portland State, but still it's a 2-score loss that should have felt like a 3.5 to 4 score loss while the game was being played. Dante Sacheret, starting quarterback for Portland State, goes 22 of 38 for 214 yards, throws 1 touchdown and 1 pick. Sacheret also rushed 17 times for 5 total yards. Some of those were sacks. He had a long rush of 11. Leading the way for Portland State on the ground is Quincy Craig, 12 rushes for 54 yards with a long of 9. So steady, you could say. And then leading the receiving room, 3 separate receivers for Portland State. My bad. McLean Griffin, 3 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. Jermaine Braddock, 7 catches for 61 yards. Quincy Craig, 6 catches for 55 yards. Takeaways that I have from this Portland State game are, well, first, I'm going to go back to the comment section because honestly, I'm still more interested in talking to Idaho State. McLean Westbrook saying living through that second quarter would have been bad enough, but I watched from the Utah State student section. My God, that's a gut punch. Patty Firks in the comment section says PSU played him tough. Look, Patty, you're right. You're right that Portland State looked much better this week than last week. Losing 81-7. I'm going to quote Grizz fan from last week, where Portland State, they did their best at the end, but just could not draw up that 90-point play to close the gap. No, you're right, Patty. This week it was closer. I guess the takeaways are, I don't think Portland State should be moving in anyone's mind even near the middle of the conference. I think that just based off, if you're looking at week 2 in isolation, there's 3 pretty clear bottom teams in terms of talent overall, or in terms of what the talent can put together at this moment. We already covered those 3. And Portland State, look, they might be that Mendoza line they used to be the Mendoza line of, if you beat Portland State, you might be okay. If you lose to Portland State, you suck. The new Mendoza line is Portland State can beat the absolutely atrocious teams, but anyone above atrocious is probably going to beat Portland State. That's how I'm going to understand Portland State. So moving on to number 8, Northern Arizona. And look, Northern Arizona, they did look better this week, which Northern Arizona should have, because they were not playing a Pac-12, soon to be Pac-2. Well, Arizona's soon to be a Big 12 team. The Pac-12 is soon to be the Pac-2. This week, Northern Arizona visited FCS North Dakota. And FCS North Dakota, they're broadly understood as a team that's going to threaten to make the playoffs year in and year out, but typically not advance much in the playoffs if they do sneak in. Northern Arizona falls 37-22. Look, the game was, I don't think this game was as close as 37-22 would suggest. It was 30-9 at the end of the third quarter. I don't think there was a single moment where North Dakota really felt threatened in this game, minus that it just took a while for anyone to score. The only score of the first quarter came at the 3 minutes and 49 seconds left, when Gavin Zybarth had a 2-yard touchdown run. What I took away from this game is, one, I now understand the offensive weapon that might make Northern Arizona a pain in the ass sometimes. Starting quarterback Kai Milner is, look, he's solid. He is most certainly not the best Big Sky quarterback, and there will never be anyone pretending that's the case. But Milner can be a weapon both on the ground and through the air, and at this point, he looks like the offense for NAU. Look, Milner goes 20 of 33 through the air for 258 yards and 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. Milner also led NAU in rushing, 14 rushes for 76 yards and a touchdown. So Milner accounts for 3 touchdowns in weeks where a team does not lose their game. That's not going to win Big Sky Player of the Week, but it's going to get a vote or 2 for Big Sky Player of the Week. So no, Milner, there were moments where you could see Milner being a starter on a decent amount of Big Sky teams and being effective. So offensively, that's the weapon for Northern Arizona that's going to cause, that has the ability to cause problems. Leading rusher from last season, Dracene Hall, 3 rushes for 21 yards. I don't know if it's injuries or if he's just fallen down the depth chart, but Dracene Hall, anyway, it might be good for NAU that someone else other than Hall is producing on the ground. Also, Devon Starling rushes 15 times for 73 yards. in the receiving room, Hendricks Johnson, who seems like he's been at NAU for 17 years because the number's not 17, but the number might be 6. 5 catches for 48 yards, and Coleman Owen, 6 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. Look at the team stat breakdown. NAU, look at the yardage wise, they were close. They were virtually identical with North Dakota. 448 yards allowed to North Dakota, 445 gained for NAU. But again, the fact of equal yards doesn't necessarily matter, especially when it's again, this game was not close at any point. Hit the comment section. We have UND looked dominant from Patty Ferks. Again, correct that. See, Patty, that was my takeaway. I didn't think though the score looked better at the end. NAU didn't look like they're in the same class as North Dakota. And North Dakota is a maybe kind of just sneak into the playoff type of team. So also Patty Ferks, not NAU is the new Mendoza line, in my opinion. I mean, look, I think Portland State and NAU are in a death match for what that new Mendoza line is. But of course, it depends what you mean by Mendoza line, because I don't think either NAU or Portland State, look, we're going to talk about a team that looks like they are significantly better than last season in a second. The top half of the Big Sky, which at top half, meaning 7 total teams. There's 7 teams this league who I think reasonably can say, hey, we think we have the talent to at least try to sneak into the playoffs. Yeah, that's not the case for NAU. That's not the case for Portland State. So it depends what you think your Mendoza line's talking about. For me, it's NAU and Portland State might be in their own class of they suck, but they're not catastrophes right now. I also think both these schools are 2 of the more depressing teams, because at least I'm going to go back to Idaho State and Cal Poly. You can at least look through those games and say, I know what magnetizes me to want to watch these teams. I don't have that with Portland State or Northern Arizona. Portland State, they're just in stasis. I don't know structurally how much better they can get. And Northern Arizona, they seem like a school who should, relative to what the university is, relative to the resources the university has, they should do better. I think they need to move on from Chris Ball. And I don't have much else to say about Northern Arizona. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to quit talking about Northern Arizona and move on. Number 7, Eastern Washington. Now the Eagles, I think narrative-wise, Eastern is one of the teams that has the most at stake this year. It's been on. If you're new to the Big Sky, Eastern Washington was dominant for virtually 2 decades, and since Aaron Best took over his first season in 2018, taking over Eastern for Bo Baldwin with Bo Baldwin's guys, Eastern finished 2nd in the nation. And last season, honestly, was the first season that Eastern Washington was essentially all Aaron Best guys. The COVID year actually propped up Eastern for an extra year. And look, I say all that backstory because I'm really rooting for Eastern. I want Eastern to be good. And the Eagles absolutely did not look particularly great start. Last weekend's North Dakota State. North Dakota State's just very good. Eastern had moments where they looked better against North Dakota State, but still gave up 500 some yards. You could watch that game and both understand that the Eagles look better, but not tell yourself, look, that this is any sort of playoff team, because we're saying they looked better and they gave up 500 yards. We do have to keep that in mind. Well, Eastern, to me, they had one of the 3 most impressive weeks of the Big Sky this week. And honestly, I kind of sneak them into one of the top 2 most impressive outings of the Big Sky, where, look, Eastern travels to Fresno State. Fresno State is a pretty solid Mountain West team. And Eastern pushes the Fresno State Bulldogs to overtime. The Eagles go down 34-31 in overtime. Again, just a really impressive overall outing. Another part that's impressive is the Eagles trailed 14-3 at halftime. So the Eagles had to come back to force OT. And honestly, Eastern led for a reasonable amount Eastern led in the 4th quarter. Eags came all the way back to lead 24-21, and then Fresno forces OT with a field goal. Then it ends up being double OT because Eastern scores a touchdown on their first possession, which is followed up by a Fresno touchdown. Game ended. Fresno State kicked a field goal their second possession, and then Eastern threw a pick, their first play of their final OT possession. But very good outing overall. Kiko Vesperis quarterback goes 27-46 for 233 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. On the ground, Justice Jackson, 11 rushes for 79 yards and 1 touchdown. Tuna Altahir, 15 rushes for 43 yards. In the receiving room, Efton Chisholm, an all Big Sky level talent, 9 receptions, 71 yards, 1 touchdown. Then Anthony Stell Jr., 7 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown as well. Overall, Eastern outgains Fresno State 366-364. And look, I'm going to hit Patty in the comment section real quick. Said the defense seriously impressed me, especially the front seven. So much improvement. Patty, I'm assuming you're talking about relative to last year, but also probably relative to last week. Because I don't think anyone who pays attention to college football overall is going to say that Fresno State is as effective a rushing team as North Dakota State. And Eastern, look, the stat line is much better for Eastern overall against a theoretically better team in Fresno State. Also, Patty in the comment section, Kiko excites me a ton. Still pretty raw, but such an athlete. So I think it's safe to say for Eastern, look, this week is going to be huge, and we'll talk about the game at the end of the show about who Eastern's playing. But Eastern overall has a murderous first 5 weeks of the schedule, and Eastern, if they're going to try to sneak into the playoffs to have a rebound season, the Eags essentially have to win 2 out of their next 3 to have really much of a chance, because the second half of Eastern season becomes a lot lighter, but the Eags really need to not go 0-5. The good news is, like Patty said this in the comment section multiple times, but you can look at the results now of 2 weeks in. Aaron Best brought in some more talent. This Eastern team would probably beat the hell out of last year's Eastern team. So that's good for the Big Sky, for Eastern Washington, even if they're not winning the league. The Eagles look, Eastern was not respectable last year. They were pretty bad offensively, and they were dog shit defensively. This team looks like it's getting a little bit more of that Eastern identity of being able to at least move the ball some. And defensively, the Eagles have to be at least okay if they're going to compete with some of the teams above them in the rankings. And athletically, they look better. Patty Firks in the comment section, Kiko Vesperis reminds me a lot of Eric Barrier the year before he broke out when Gage Gubrud got hurt in 2018. So, we're going to about to move on from the Eagles. But if I'm in Cheney, I know for a fact this Eagles team is better than the Eastern team of 2022. If they're going to be good enough, and when I say better, I think, look, I don't think it's a secret in the Big Sky world that Aaron Best, if Eastern looked bad this year, his seat was going to be pretty hot if he stayed. I don't know his contract situation relative to the Eastern athletic department, but Eastern, I think if you're an Eagle fan, you should be a little relaxed, understanding that this year, if we use last year as the barometer, this year doesn't have to be a playoff team for this year to be a success. They need to look like a team who could reasonably compete with the top half of the Big Sky Conference. And like Eastern's looking like a much more of a toss-up game now with some of the teams above them in the rankings than virtually anyone would have had Eastern at preseason. Coming in at number 6, UC Davis. You need to ignore this week if you're UC Davis. UC Davis traveled to Corvallis, Oregon, played the FBS number 16 Oregon State Beavers, got their asses kicked 55-7 because the number 16 team in the FBS should kill any top FCS team. It's the nature of the gap. Quarterback Miles Hastings, 12 for 22 passing for 51 yards and a pick. Lan Larison did go 1 of 1 passing for 12 yards. Really, Lan Larison, again, running back, but you see him all over the field. Larison, 15 catches for 55 yards. He's going to kind of be the star of this team. Also picked up 2 catches for 7 yards. Biggest takeaway here is if you're UC Davis, burn the tape. Oregon State's good. UC Davis is a solid FCS team. They're still in that march to prove the narrative of last season that Davis was good and just lost some single score games to very good FCS teams. Look, that narrative is still alive, but 2 weeks into the season, it is going to be hard to gauge UC Davis because first they killed a terrible Southland team, Texas A&M Commerce, and then this week gets killed by a very good FBS team. So are there generalizable takeaways from UC Davis that you did not have week 1? No, other than that Lan Larison is going to replace Alonzo Gilliam just fine. Before we get to our next team, we're going to hear a little bit more from show sponsor Hughes River Expedition. Look, Hughes River Expedition, run by Colin Hughes. He's a great vandal. It's been vandal owned and operated since 1976. If you're interested in any type of river expeditions, like if you want to go down the Middle Fork of the Salmon, you want to go down the main Salmon River of no return, you want to see the Salmon River Canyons or the Selway, you want to check out special trips like seeing the Perced meteor shower, you got to get in contact with Colin Hughes. Hughes River Expeditions trips, they're all inclusive. So they take care of everything. You just get your ass there. And then you have the trip of a lifetime. Doesn't matter if you're trying to book for a larger group for like team building or a corporate type of retreat, or if you're just a family who wants to do family stuff and want to get away from screens and be outside and enjoy rapids. Yeah, you can do it as small groups too. Just get a hold of Colin. I got to stress this, man. If you even think you're into expeditions, call him now. 800-262-1882 or check him out at hughesriver.com. Hit in the comment section. Patty First letting us know he's going to be in Cheney Saturday. Says agreed. And the biggest thing for me this year was just looking for improvement physically, which I've seen, and talking Eastern right now. And it says I'm nowhere near as high on Davis after 2 weeks as I was preseason. Well, I mean, Patty, I just think there's nothing to take away yet. They did what UC Davis did exactly what they were supposed to do. Murdered a bad FCS team, then got murdered by a good FBS team. So I don't know. I don't think, again, other than the Lan Larison takeaway, I don't know what else you're supposed to understand differently about UC Davis. Number 5, Montana Grizzlies. And there was a lot of consternation in Grizzland after last week against Butler. The Grizz still won relatively comfortably. Last week against Butler, you still saw some glimpses of how Montana could take a step offensively and how they could be the exact same dumpster fire they were last season. Well, the quarterback had officially not been settled by Bobby Hauck. He has been open about this. Week 1, Sam Vidlak, a more traditional pocket passer, took the overwhelming majority of the snaps. According to Bobby Hauck, the design of the OOC was to give Vidlak the overwhelming majority of the reps week 1 and to give Clifton McDowell, the running quarterback, the overwhelming majority of reps in week 2. That's what we saw. And against Utah Tech, the Grizz didn't really have much trouble whatsoever. Montana wins 43-13. From the Grizz faithful I talked to, their big takeaway was Butler looks a lot better than Utah Tech, even though Butler is non-scholarship. But this was a game Montana led heading into the fourth quarter, 43-0, and Utah Tech tacked on a couple garbage time touchdowns. So this is an absolute ass kicking on the Montana side. Clifton McDowell at quarterback goes 7 of 10 passing for 94 yards. On the ground, he rushed 9 times for 26 yards. Sam Vidlak, for his reps, went 6 of 9 through the air for 41 yards and threw 1 touchdown. That touchdown was thrown to Evan Schaefer. I am going to complain a little bit from the Grizz end after I talk about Nick Osmo. Look, Montana does look like they're a little bit more solid in the running room. Returner Nick Osmo didn't play last week. 12 rushes for 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Eli Gilman who had a solid game in week 1, rushed 16 times for 78 yards and 2 touchdowns. Those two look like the top 2 running backs. So Xavier Harris is going to be a threat too, just depending on how health works out to sort out that hierarchy. It's not a secret. Bobby Hauck traditionally likes to run more than pass. And well, this week, now this was also starting the running quarterback. Montana passed 21 total times and rushed 57 total times. But the thing I'm going to bitch about, like Junior Bergen returned a punt for a touchdown, so he contributes elsewhere. But Junior Bergen is one of the better wide receivers in the Big Sky in my mind. He's not at the Hayden Hatton level, but he's a good receiver who would be a number 1 or number 2 on most non-Idaho teams in the Big Sky. He caught 2 passes last week. He caught 1 pass this week. I'm frustrated with Bobby Hauck's aversion to getting the ball to guys who are the Grizzlies' best players offensively. Now it might sound a bit rich to be complaining in a game where Montana scored 43 points and dominated. But if you're a Montana Grizzly fan, what you care about is less what it looks like against a lower level FCS team. And I know Utah Tech is in the United Athletic, whatever co-op they are. The conference was not officially acknowledged by the NCAA, but Utah Tech is not going to compete for the playoffs. They're not an ascending FCS program. If you're a Grizz fan, you're not concerned about your takeaways versus Utah Tech. You're concerned with your takeaways against the top of the Big Sky Conference. And offensively, I'm not anti what's going on in Montana, because there have been moments where you see more looks and more creativity. But then you look at the overall totals, and again, like the best receiver on the team has 3 catches through 2 weeks. I don't think that's going to fly against Montana State. I don't think Montana has the offensive line to ground and pound against Montana State. I don't think they have the offensive line to do that against Idaho, UC Davis, or Sac State. But enough talking about the offensive issues, because that is the big picture. That is not yet resolved of, is this a step forward or not heading in relative to last season. Defensively, Montana still has speed. It's hard to gauge. I don't think that Montana looks quite as fearsome defensively as we've kind of been accustomed to, particularly up front. But the Grizz are not going to be a bad defensive team for sure. Like the total yardage was the Grizz amassed 397, gave up 361 total yards. Keep in mind, Montana also scored on a punt return, which that does not go to the offense, even though it's offensive production. On the ground, Grizz averaged 4.6 yards per rush, gave it 4.9 yards per rush, dominated time of possession, 35 minutes to 24 minutes. So, that's the promising part you look at for Montana fan too, is that, yeah, sure, this strategy might not work against Montana State or the top of the conference, but you got to look at the individual facets that are working well that could work together overall in an overall scheme. I really do believe that Montana does not have the line to do a run heavy approach like Montana State does. But I also believe Clifton McDowell is the kind of guy that Bobby Hauck wants to be the quarterback, because Bobby Hauck, of the things Bobby Hauck has done as head coach, which he's done a lot of great things, guys. Has multiple runner-up finishes, national runner-up finishes at Montana, has made the playoffs virtually every season he's been at Montana, has advanced in the playoffs virtually every season he's been at Montana. So look, it's not, I'm complaining about this, not to say Bobby Hauck is not a good coach. He's obviously a good coach. He's one of the most successful in the history of the Big Sky Conference. But I think he hasn't been able to develop a quarterback. That is just a historical fact of Bobby Hauck at Montana. And I think he really is going to want to start the senior who can run and maybe not make mistakes. Where Sam Vidlak, I think if he is the starting quarterback, I really do believe offensively Montana is going to be much more dynamic. Clifton McDowell looks a lot like Lucas Johnson from last year in that he can be a solid passer in the intermediate game, but he's not going to stretch the field, and he's absolutely going to have accuracy issues, and he's not a pocket passer. So you're going to lose some of those. There's going to be a ceiling offensively of what Montana can do against the better teams. Patty in the comment section, I think Vidlak is the better player, but I feel like it would be such a Hauck thing to start the other guy. Yes, because Houck needs to give Vidlak some grace to work through mistakes because Vidlak has an arm. He absolutely has the arm talent to stretch the defense. He's an objectively better passer than Clifton McDowell, but there are going to be some bumps from any underclassmen making. Look, this is Sam Vidlak's second game as a college player, and he's transferred twice. So look, the dude, relatively speaking, is young experience-wise. But look, we're moving on from Montana. Coming in at number 4, Sacramento State. And look, in the comment section, we got Dane Moon saying Sac 4, Weber State 3, Montana State 2, UI 1. Right, please? Maybe not, Dane. Sacramento State answered a question. Caden Bennett is their starter, which is exactly what I expected would happen after the week 1 outing against Nichols. So Sacramento State has a second consecutive underwhelming Southland opponent in which Sacramento State won pretty comfortably. Final score is 34-6, but Sacramento State led 34-6 at the start of the fourth quarter. Caden Bennett Caden Bennett was clearly the starter for this game. Carson Camp came in for relief duty at the end, but Bennett goes 14-22 through the air for 176 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. On the ground, Caden Bennett showed why he's a dual threat. 10 rushes for 101 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, hey, that's 3 touchdowns plus rushing for over 100 yards. I don't think that's Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week, but I bet he's getting some votes. Marcus Fulcher, number 2 rusher for Sacramento State, 12 rushes, 79 yards, and 1 touchdown. And Marshall Martin, All-American tight end, did not play today for precautionary purposes. Leading the Hornets in the receiving room, Coleman Kuntz, 4 catches for 68 yards, and then Carlos Hill, 7 catches, 53 yards. Overall, look, it was an ass-kicking, 34-6, obviously. The Hornets surrendered 206 yards and amassed 503. So takeaways from this game are, first, I'm looking at that 45 rushes to 26 passes. And I'm seeing a theme with some of the better schools in the Big Sky, which is, look, what works stylistically ebbs and flows over time. And right now, some of the stronger teams, and this is less about play calling and more about offensive line strength. A lot of the better teams in the Big Sky are balanced offensively, or they're a little bit run heavy, rushing that 55-ish% of the time, passing 45-ish% of the time. Wouldn't be shocked if that's the identity that Andy Thompson has, first-year head coach for Sacramento State this season for the Hornets. Under Troy Taylor previous season, the offensive identity for Sacramento State altered pretty radically based off the talent. But this looks like a team that has found their quarterback, and they like that the guy is a dual threat, which means they got a dual threat quarterback and a strong line and some already solid running backs. Like, hey, Marcus Fulcher's an all Big Sky level dude. Sacramento State's going to run a little bit more than they pass. Hard to take away much from Sacramento State defensively. Other than that, they dominated Texas A&M Commerce. So obviously there's still some talent, even after losing Defensive Player of the Year last season to graduation Marte Mapu. Andy Thompson still has a relatively full cabinet compared to the shitty Southland teams Sacramento State's played. I think 4 is a reasonable place for Sac to be. I think the body of evidence we've looked at so far, because I don't think Sacramento State's truly been tested, but they're clearly not a bad team. I just don't think we have any evidence to call them a potentially great team. So in that, number 4 is fine. I think there's a bit of a split between 4-3 and 2-1 in terms of body of evidence presented this season. And look, Sacramento State is looking like they're trying to be tough defensively. They've been tougher defensively the last few years than I think people, conventional wisdom would say. And with a former long-time defensive coordinator in the Big Sky taking over as head coach, not shocking that the identity would look to be a little bit tougher overall. And I guess the big question I've had is how this team reacts to losing, if not the best offensive coach in the Big Sky, like the second best of the last handful of years, in Troy Taylor, who's now at Stanford. And 2 weeks in, Sacramento State looks just fine. Coming in at number 3, Weber State. And Weber State I think they had I call it the fourth most impressive showing this week. Weber State travels to Northern Iowa. Northern Iowa is a team I love to complain about because they always seem to be grandfathered in to discussion about the top of the FCS when they're always in that at that 7-ish win threshold. And Weber State takes care of business 34-17. And look, Northern Iowa, they're typically a defensive-oriented team. Weber historically has not been a defensive-oriented team, an offensive-oriented team. So this, on paper, you'd expect lower scoring game, but the Wildcats, they're consistent towards 17 the first half, 17 the second half, and pitched a second half shutout. So relatively convincing win. On the offensive side of the ball, Kyle Weiser starts for Weber State, and I'm just going to say this again. I think he's the least talented Big Sky quarterback. Don't mean that as a put down to the dude. I think his ceiling is to be serviceable. He was 11-22 for 179 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 pick. Weiser is just not going to win football games for Wildcats. The big question is, can he produce enough to not lose them? And Weiser did. The story for Weber State, of course, offensively is on the ground. The Wildcats rushed 43 times compared to 23 passes. Leading the way is a guy who I expect is probably going to be Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week, Damon Bankson, 22 rushes for 144 yards and 3 touchdowns. Bankson is an all Big Sky level running back returning from last season, and he's going to be the workhorse for the Wildcats, no question whatsoever. Mickey Mental, first-year head coach, second-year at Weber State, was the offensive coordinator previously. Team looked, at least in the spring, like they're going to try a lot of run of RPO. I don't know if Weiser is the guy you can really do that with, but if you got Damon Bankson, a strong enough line, who cares? Leading the receiving room for the Wildcats, Jacob Sharp, 2 catches, 82 yards, and then Hayden Meacham, 2 catches for 20 yards and a touchdown. But for Weber State, the story is often defensive oriented, and pitching a second half shutout is pretty damn good. I don't care who you're playing against. The Wildcats also forced 6 UNI turnovers. So there you go. You force 6 turnovers, pitch a shutout in the second half. That's how you look. That's how you look convincing. So 2 weeks in, Weber State, they look week 1. They played a D2 team. Nothing to take away. Wildcats did look good, and you could understand from this game. Not only is Weber State still there defensively, even after losing transfers with Jay Hill, there's still talent there. You can see how Weber could be with a head coach who's going to open up the playbook a little bit more than Jay Hill would have wanted to. You can see where Weber State could have a little bit more of a footprint offensively. I just think they're a couple years away from having the talent, particularly at quarterback in the receiving room, that Mickey Mental is going to need. Patty Ferks in the comment section, I think this game said more about the overrating of UNI than Weber being great. Oh, hey, Patty, agree. I think if you were skeptical about Weber State and you saw this game, your takeaway is, hey, I don't think Weber State is great, but they're still in the playoff discussion. I don't agree with where their national rankings are, but my understanding of Weber State is, look, this is a team that's going to threaten for the playoffs. This is a team that's going to be, they're going to be tough week in and week out. So also, Patty in the comment section, they're not going to be bad, obviously, but I just feel like their offense will let them down. I don't disagree against some of the better teams, and this is where your point about UNI being overrated probably comes in. I think the better teams, the Big Sky, are going to say, hey, Kylan Weiser beat us. And the better teams in the Big Sky, Weiser's not going to be able to beat. But there are teams in the Big Sky who defensively will be able to limit Bankson more than what UNI did. And that's where the downfall for the Wildcats is going to come. I just think based off of what we've seen so far, you would limit the teams that are going to for sure be able to do that to probably like your top 5-ish teams in the conference. Before we get to our final 2, we have one more sponsor we got to hear from. This is where we get to hear from. This is Tap the Keg, and this is Moscow specific. But hey, homecoming for University of Idaho is October 14th against University of Montana. On October 13th, the night before, at the Dan O'Brien Track and Field Complex, which is right outside the Kibbe Dome, you got to come to Tap the Keg. It's University of Idaho's version of Oktoberfest. You're going to have a bunch of local and regional beers, ciders, and seltzers. You're going to have a bunch of Oktoberfest-inspired food vendors and live music. It's essentially going to be a party. That's it. There's going to be kick-ass stuff to drink, kick-ass food, and a bunch of Vandal alums. So if you're going to be there for homecoming on Friday, you should come to Tap the Keg. If you buy tickets by September 25th, pricing is going to be a little bit on the cheaper side. Someday I'll actually tell you how much those tickets are. But if you're interested, you need to go to go.uidaho.edu/tapthekeg to buy your tickets. Get them before September 25th. And if you're going to be there for homecoming, you absolutely got to be at Tap the Keg. If I were in Moscow, which I won't be which I'm annoyed about, but I absolutely would be coming to Tap the Keg. Buy your tickets now. Final two teams. And here we might have a surprise, guys. Number 2, University of Idaho. Now, U of I had the sexiest win, no question, this week. The Vandals travel to Reno for a bye game against University of Nevada. The Vandals go home with an extra $400,000 to fund the athletic department. But the Vandals also beat the hell out of Nevada, 33-6. This game was over after the first play. Very first play for Idaho, 75-yard touchdown pass from quarterback Giovanni McCoy to tight end TJ Ivey. Nevada finished with 6. Idaho hit the extra point. So truly, score-wise, this game was over after the first play. And Idaho dominated this game from wire to wire. Hitting the box score for a second, Giovanni McCoy, 15-21, 313 yards and 2 touchdowns. And look, that's a great completion percentage. But second, 3 to 4 of those missed passes total were under duress. So truly, with time on the game, Giovanni missed like 2 passes. It was just incredible. In the comment section, Woods blocked the hell out of 2 guys on that. He's talking about that first touchdown pass to TJ Ivey. Look, hey, Super George 111, you're 100% correct. There was some kick-ass blocking for Idaho that play. But that play set the tone for the game of Idaho is not coming to just collect a check and hope things go well. Idaho's coming for blood. Hey, Wolfpack, you're back on the endangered species list, guys. Rushing, Anthony Woods, 18 rushes for 71 yards. The Vandals as a whole rushed for 150 yards on 38 attempts and 1 rushing touchdown. Giovanni McCoy, 21 pass attempts. So you see that split of 21 pass attempts to 38 rush attempts. Although Idaho left some points on the field too, in spite of dominating this 33-6. This could very easily have been a 52-6 type of game. Hayden Hatton, 5 receptions for 85 yards. Jermaine Jackson, 3 receptions for 45 yards. And honestly, the biggest 2 obvious takeaways here. Offensively, Idaho's dynamic. The offense, there were some moments where the offensive line, only relative to elite teams for Idaho, looked like there's some room where they're not at like Montana State level. But that's nitpicking. Idaho dominated on both sides of the ball. And really, to me, in this game, the biggest takeaway is that Idaho was a strong defensive team last year, and the Vandals are better defensively this season. They're bigger up front. They're just as good in the secondary. Vandal faithful had reasonable anxiety at the start of the season about starting 3 completely new linebackers because guys graduated and transferred. Linebackers look fine, guys. Idaho's fast. They have better size on the defensive side of the ball. And the Vandals are coming for blood. This is the team that everyone in the Big Sky, and especially everyone in Moscow, was hoping to see out of Idaho when the Vandals rejoined the Big Sky. Jason Eck is what he's done in 2 years at Idaho is incredible. Side note, though it was the sexiest win, this was not close to the most impressive outing of Big Sky teams. Because I'm going to talk about Eastern and Fresno State. Fresno State is infinitely better than Nevada. And when we talk about Montana State and South Dakota State would have beat the shit out of Nevada too. So we do have to hold that in our heads. This was a huge program building win for Idaho. This was an eye-catching win. It's going to help Idaho in the playoffs, beating an FBS team. But just for the sake of talking about rankings, Nevada would not finish in the top 4 or 5 in the Big Sky. Dane Moon in the comments section, they, meaning the Vandals, stepped up their game in every way. Super George 111, dogs only. Yeah, dude, that's it. Idaho is going to be good offensively. We know that. We know that Eck and Schleissner, offensive coordinator Luke Schleissner, is an inventive play caller. We know that Jason Eck himself was play caller at South Dakota State. So he steps in there as needed as well when appropriate based off his decision making. So we know Idaho is going to be good on that side of the ball. We know they're going to be dynamic. We know they're going to want to run first a little bit, which you saw in the split we talked about, but the relative strength of Idaho is through the air and in the receiving room. But Jason Eck, just part of what he likes to do, he's an alum of University of Wisconsin. He likes to sit on the ball. He loves to milk that clock and just keep the other team's offense on ice, but it's not the boring as hell Wisconsin basketball version. It's Idaho's a fun as hell team to watch offensively, but these guys are good on the other side too. These guys are among the best in the Big Sky on the defensive side of the ball. Idaho in two out of conference games so far has beaten the hell out of a bad Southland Lamar team and beaten the hell out of a bad Mountain West, but FBS team with an FBS budget and FBS resources and FBS scholarships. They beat the hell out of Nevada. So the Vandals have answered the questions that have been asked of Idaho so far. Idaho has answered resoundingly. To me, Idaho has, based off the 2-game sample size, has asserted themselves as nationally elite. Not just good. Last season, the Vandals were good. Right now, the Vandals look nationally elite. And the final team we're going to talk about is maybe a surprise, but this is where I think it should have been too. Montana State. Montana State Bobcats traveled to Brookings, South Dakota, played one hell of a game on the road against the number 1 team in the nation. The Cats fall 20-16. And look, this game was close wire to wire. Montana State actually led 10-0 at the half. And look, if you haven't seen the final 2 minutes of this game on ESPN Plus, do yourself a favor and go watch it. The Montana State looked like they had won this on the second to last play of the game. With Sean Chambers threw what looked like a long touchdown pass with 2 seconds left, but was ruled incomplete. Receiver was out of bounds in the back of the end zone, and the Cats were not able to score on that last play. But look, South Dakota State is good. Defending national champions, number 1 ranked team, strong on both sides of the ball. And this looked like the type of game where if Montana State and South Dakota State played 100 times in Brookings, I'm not talking about splitting, just in Brookings, Montana State would probably win 48 of them. This Montana State team they're good, guys. I want to do yourself a favor if you're not a Cat fan. I don't like, I'm going to pull the curtain back. I don't like Montana State. I grew up in a Grizz household and I went to University of Idaho. So I am predisposed to not like Montana State. Like I said, do yourself a favor, watch some of the Cats. Brent Vegan is a good coach. He's honestly the anti-Bobby Hauck. Everything you may reasonably complain about Bobby Hauck being too rigid, Brent Vegan's the opposite. You look at Montana State, they have 2 quarterbacks who are great athletes who are both very good rushers and solid passers. Brent Vegan plays, and those 2 quarterbacks, starter Tommy Mellott, backup Sean Chambers. Brent Vegan plays those 2 together all of the time. There is a ton of misdirection for Montana State, virtually play to play. And for a team that rushed 48 times compared to 15 passes, that may sound like it's predictable. No, they're not. It's true. it is wild to say Montana State is the team that is going to rush 2 out of every 3 times, 3 out of every 4 times. And when they're about to snap, you're truly watching that team and saying, I wonder what they're going to do next. Are we going to have misdirection? Are we going to have a delayed quarterback run? Are we going to have an end round? What the hell are we going to do? Because Montana State does a ton as offensively. Brent Vegan knows what he's doing. Look, Montana State lucked out in Brent Vegan. He was honestly like the 5th or 6th choice to replace Jeff Choate because Montana State was rigid about maintaining the assistants. And look, they lucked out. Brent Vegan was a great hire. On the game, Sean Chambers passing 3 of 9 for 53 yards and 1 pick. Tommy Mellott, 6 of 6 for 34 yards. And Mellott is kind of weird to watch passing because he's accurate on intermediate throws. I don't think as a passer, he's top half of the conference, but he's easily serviceable as a passer. But it doesn't matter. He is one of the most dynamic rushers. And Sean Chambers is a dynamic rusher. Chambers led the way rushing for Montana State, 20 rushes for 90 yards and a touchdown. The Cats overall 211 yards on 48 carries against one of the best teams in the nation. And you look at the stat splits. This was a tough game. The Cats gained 298 yards total, gave up 341. Time of possession, the Cats led 35 minutes to 24 minutes. Part of that was because, again, watch the fourth quarter, guys. South Dakota State, they scored 13 of their 20 points in the fourth quarter. For a long time, Montana State looked like they were going to handle this game. And the takeaways for me, talking Montana State, are, again, the Cats are good. The Cats are good on both sides of the ball. They're physical on both sides of the ball. Like Patty Ferk says, their own O-line looks much improved. And the O-line at Montana State is good to begin with. So this game against South Dakota State, I would not be shocked whatsoever if we get a rematch deep in the playoffs, because both these teams look like the type of teams that are going to advance. That's where we're at on this Big Sky season. So this week, sorry, hit the comment section again. Montana State in the Kibbe Dome on October 28th is going to be lit. Yes, if these two teams keep up at their current pace, that game is one of the couple that you'd say is a de facto Big Sky Conference championship game. Montana State looks good. Idaho looks good. How these two teams match up when they actually line up is, it's fun to even think about that this far away. And look, big picture, it is fun or exciting to me doing the show to talk about teams 7 through 1 in the conference. There's 7 teams in the Big Sky that I think right now are fun to watch. There's still a couple in that bottom half, Idaho State, Cal Poly, who I think there's intrigue to pay attention to. This is just a good Big Sky season, guys. The football season in the FCS is 12 weeks. And if your team doesn't make the playoffs, we're already through 2 of them. We're hitting week 3 right now. We're going to be 25% of the way through football season, guys, at the end, 7 days from now. This thing just flies by. So look, support Tubbs the Club, patreon.com/Tubbs at the Club. Join our Only Tubbs Discord. If you're not into supporting Tubbs the Club, like you're a fan of other Big Sky teams, you're just not about to be in a paid chat for University of Idaho, hit the subscribe button for Tubbs the Club. Help us get to 1,000. That's when YouTube starts to pay us. We also go out of our way to do conference-wide coverage. So Super George 111 comment section on to Cal. Yep, that's for Idaho. I'm going to hit the matchups this week, the final week of the out-of-conference season. And, man, the out-of-conference can just be rough in the FCS. You guys all know this. So we have Weber State traveling to number 12, University of Utah. Nothing to take away. Stetson, a not very good FCS team, travels to Bozeman to die against Montana State. Idaho travels to Berkeley. That's a potentially intriguing game against Pac-12 for now, Cal. Utah Tech at Northern Arizona. And Utah Tech playing 3 Big Sky teams that are out of conference. And now Utah Tech at least has a chance to pick up a win against Northern Arizona. Southeastern Louisiana at Eastern Washington. So that's in Cheney is probably the best FCS on FCS game of the week. And it absolutely matters for the Eags. This to me is must win for Eastern. Portland State plays God knows who from God knows what. I'm not going to acknowledge a sub D1 game. Northern Colorado is going to lose at Washington State by a lot again. If Northern Colorado, it's a very real question of whether the Bears will eclipse 20 points in 12 quarters of out-of-conference football. Northern Iowa gets to rebound in Pocatello at Idaho State, or Idaho State gets to rebound and right the ship and have the narrative that McLean Westbrook was saying of, hey, this game was actually relatively close against Utah State minus that second quarter. Anyway, Idaho State gets another FCS shot hosting Northern Iowa. Sacramento State, this is an intriguing game. Sacramento State travels to Stanford to play against their former head coach, Troy Taylor. Cal Poly plays a sub D1 team I'm not going to talk about. Montana hosts Ferris State, the D2 defending national champion, who may be the most talented team they've played this season. And then UC Davis hosts Southern Utah in what should be a bloodbath. So that's it for this week, guys. For everyone who tuned in, thanks a lot. Share the show, subscribe to the YouTube like we talked about. So follow Tubbs of the Club at Tubbs of the Club. Follow me at Brian Marceau. And in a moment, after I screw around in the background to find out how to play us out, we're going to call it a night. Thanks for hanging around, all the live viewers. Thanks for sharing the show. And best time of the year, dudes, fall. FCS football is going on. If you're an FCS fan, that's who'd be watching the show. The shit goes by in a blink, guys. Just enjoy it while it lasts. And with that, see you next week.